for the years and 50 years of great rock and roll music, or 60 years, One Thing Leads to Another remains in my top 10. I think it's a great song. I listen to it all the time.
Great, yeah, well, it was just one of those songs that came out of nowhere. I feel very much like the messenger on that one. I wasn't quite sure what I was saying at the time, but as the years have gone by and I've heard different people's interpretations of the lyrics, I've started to realize there was some kind of hidden message in there that even I would discover later on, and maybe it's a song that's coming of age.
Well, you know what? It's interesting you should mention that, because I've always had my argument for what I thought the lyrics to One Thing Leads to Another is about, and I think it always seemed to me about arguing. It always seemed about just a fight in a relationship, how one thing leads to another, and that's how it struck me. Maybe that's a common or uncommon interpretation, I don't know. But whenever I bring that up around other people, a lot of them go, "Oh, yeah, I can see that." But where does that rank in the...
Yeah, I guess in a way, I think at the time there had been some politician that had been really busted for lying. And I remember thinking that, if you want to be a good liar, then you've got to at least have a good memory. You kind of forgot what he'd said 6 months before.
Well, that's good. Actually, it's funny you should mention it. I hadn't really ever thought about it in terms of politics. I always think all that stuff about how things then get frozen in a relationship after one thing leads to another, and I used to even it actually sort of gave me insight for this. Again, it comes down to then interesting how an interpretation can have nothing to do with the original inspiration, but can still be good. And I remember thinking the lyrics to that song got me rethinking how I ever wanted to have an argument in a relationship, because I just didn't want anything that how things do just escalate so fast. But now I'll have to rethink it all.
I think about, if you want to have a good argument, then you've got to really be a good listener.
Right.
If you're going to answer the person in the right way and not eventually win, but take the wind out of the sails of what's coming at you, you've got to at least listen and know how to attack it.
Well, very good. Now, I mentioned that next hour on Coast to Coast, we're going to talk to a woman about sustaining farming practices and about being, self-sustaining in a way, too, for one's family, and what you can do to actually, what you can and can't do to raise your own food, and what the limitations are, and some tips on stuff like that, because there's a lot of people who think about doing that, but apparently you are already do that to a point.
I am indeed, yeah. I mean, it was not dumb luck that I ended up where I am, but it was thanks to my wife, who I met her in New York just in 1999, and we were partying like it was 1999. And then she's French, so she decided to go back to France, and after a while I followed her. This was after 9/11 and all this stuff had happened. And I just started to have strange dreams or feelings that I wasn't really in control of my life in the short term anymore, let alone the long term. And as you said earlier, trying to save the world, or it was at least just trying to get some sense in my own world first. So she went back to France, and somebody gave her an old sheep, and she discovered what she wanted to do with the rest of her life, which was to make goat's cheese. And she went back to school to learn how to do that. Then she persuaded me to buy some land. And then I started doing the figures, and I was thinking, hold on a minute, this isn't going to really bring in much money, and I'm going to be doing all the milking. I could see that coming.
You do that.
Right. So I decided we'd fix up these old rotten buildings that were around the farm, and we turned it into a guest house, which was a lot more fun. Then I realized we had all this land around, and we'd better put some animals and plant a few vegetables around to make the people that were coming think that it was a working farm. But it wasn't that easy. Once you've got the animals, you've got to take care of them. There's a commitment there. And they breed. And I started to sort of get information from the locals, and I realized it wasn't that hard to start raising your own meat. And if you were feeding them organically, then we could serve that at the table and say that we were serving the guests organic meat, and that escalated. People would come in with the food we were serving. And then there were vegetables that I started planting, and I was just basically learning by mistake. And I think if I can do it, a rock and roller city kid, basically at heart, finds himself in the middle of nowhere in France planting vegetables, and lo and behold, if you do the right things, they come out of the ground. Slowly but surely, the world has hit. The critical mass has now in front of you. Where your next foot falls is where you should be looking for food too. And, you know, there's a lot of people out there that have written some very interesting books, and recently I saw the film Collapse by Michael Rupert, and that kind of was a real wake-up call too. And I could see that some of the things that he was talking about, especially in the conclusion of this film, were things that I, you know, even just without thinking, these were steps that had presented themselves in my life. So I feel like I've got a guardian angel taking care of me and steering me into the path that's going to be facing a lot more people. I mean, he pointed out that Cuba seemed to be the most effective form of capitalism, even though it's very raw and very simple. But I think Castro said to all the people there, if you find a piece of land with nothing you can eat growing on it, plant something you can eat. And I think we'll be telling that to our own citizens of a lot of our countries fairly soon.
Well, that may be true. I mean, I have some strong feelings about Cuba in that I have some family members who came from Cuba, and that the way that I think that what they are oddly enough it was imposed upon them to be in survivor mode, and so they've been in survivor mode for a lot longer perhaps than anybody else, and you know maybe that's a model for how we're supposed to live in the future. I think it would be better if one were to be in that place by choice as opposed to, you know, at the end of the barrel of a gun. So
choice is good, but doesn't a good parent teach its child to leave home and be self-sufficient?
Yes.
And I think that, you know, as soon as the government tells its citizens what to do, maybe there's government control and big brother. But if there's a kind of a collective knowledge that can be shared, then there's a kind of an education there too. I mean, I don't want to get into the political side of it, but it's just basic human sense that somebody's found fruit up the hill and he wants to tell the rest of his tribe that there's fruit up the hill. He's going to pass on the message.
Right.
You know,
well, and I think that's and hopefully then more people will look at the ground that's underneath their feet and realize they could be doing more with it, and how much and what more of that. I know we'll be getting into more of it coming up next hour. But tell me before we change the subject, what's the most rewarding thing for you now as a goat farmer cheesemonger?
That it tastes really great, and I don't have to go to the supermarket, and I don't see barcodes on my meat anymore.
Yeah.
And you know, that 1 calorie that goes in my mouth is just sweat equity, not 10 calories of oil energy to bring it to my plate.
Well, and when you were first starting off with your schoolmates, forming a band and dreaming of rock and roll riches, did you ever think you'd end up raising goats in France?
No way.
Yeah.
No way. It's just, you know, you arrive at things sometimes, and you know, at my age, I'm not questioning anymore. I'm just sort of following signs. I think there are signs that come to you left and right, and you just have to start listening to the greater picture. Through the chaos is the way forward. And I'm not saying I know the way forward for everyone. I'm just decided to just take care of me and my family first, and then I would share my experiences with other people, and if it gives them confidence and encouragement to take it themselves too, then all the better.
I love that. We're talking with Cy Curnin of The Fix, who's also now still performing and raising money and awareness, and we'll talk about the music-based cancer charity that you're part of too, and some of the performances that other people can see coming up as you leave the goat farm to come to the United States, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
My carbon imprint's a little bit more than I like right now.
Well, it's okay. But when you did start off, I mean, here you were just like anybody else, right? Growing up, and you saw who would have been the first, the Beatles, or the first time you saw a band and went, I want to do that.
Yeah, they were Pop the Pops, Rolling Stones. I had an older sister who was about 4.5 years older than me. She was going off to concerts and bringing in albums into the house. So I was getting my education through her. And then when